Hello Eat Move Think listeners, I'm Simon Lim, the fitness manager here at Medcan. I'm here with my colleague Stephanie Tzemis.
Hey guys, I'm Stephanie Tzemis. I'm one of the team leads here at Medcan Toronto.
Alright Steph, how are you doing?
I'm great, Simon. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Now let's get down to business. We're here to talk about preventing injuries during your classic cottage sports. Whether that's pickleball, golf, tennis, paddleboarding, kayaking, swimming, wakeboarding, or all those quintessential college activities, some that many cottage goers don't do until they're already at the cottage. So it's important to stay safe and prevent injury, especially when something like a ruptured hamstring or a pulled muscle could leave you unable to actually enjoy your cottage vacation.
And that's right, you're not the only one. Injuries can happen at any time, even if you know what you're doing, even if you've done this sport 100 million times. There are so many stories like those of the people who jump right into the activity without proper warm-up and eventually end up getting hurt. The good news is that injury is preventable, and all it takes is a couple of minutes to warm up and to ease into the activity, and you are well on your way to having a wonderful summer afternoon.
That's exactly right, Steph. So, for example, us as trainers, we will try and prepare our clients for a summer full of fun. And in order to do that, we'll have to go through certain functional movements that we know are going to be anticipated through those clients' movement patterns to make sure that they can get through the summer injury-free.
So Simon, I do have a question for you. What are some functional movements and how are they beneficial to us before any physical activity? So give me kind of like what you consider to be a functional movement.
Okay, great question, Steph. So the term functional movement, you really have to define what the function is first. So if it's a function of a sport and you're doing an exercise similar to that, then you could argue that that exercise is one of the functional movements towards that sport. How are they beneficial to us? Practicing these functional movements on a consistent basis to build up the tolerance of your tissues during the activity, they can withstand the forces that you're applying to that body. And that itself will allow you to prevent injury or try and avoid any injuries that you may be coming across.
So in saying that, what should we focus on in terms of that whole aspect of movement?
Okay, so when we talk about joint health, we like to say there's like four main aspects: flexibility of the joint, mobility of the joint, stability of the joint, and then strength as well. You must have all four for the joint to be healthy and operate properly. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some restrictions, and those restrictions could compromise your movement pattern and therefore result in possibly an injury or discomfort and poor posture. So for example, you could have a joint that is super strong, but if it's not stable, then that muscle can't anchor and move the body the way it wants to. A great example would be I let my clients stand in a solid position. I get them to push their hands out. I'll push them and then they'll be solid. So I let them know, I'm like, you are the strong person in this. If I then put a balance pad under their feet and I push them over again, I explain to them, hey, you're still strong, you just had an unstable base. And that is similar to their joints where they can get an extremely strong chest, for example, but if their shoulder's unstable, if they use those muscles, they could result in injury.
This all sounds fine and it sounds cool and very scientific and all that kind of stuff, but how important really is it for doing cottage-related activities to incorporate this kind of stuff?
So again, great question, and I would be saying it is extremely important. The reason being, a lot of these college-related activities are putting us into extreme situations. It's also why we have so much fun. But, you know, playing tennis, for example, how often do you lunge and reach for a ball before summer? Us as trainers is really getting our clients to understand that they're using these movements almost every day for other activities, but when you're doing sport or when you're doing cottage activities, you tend to be applying a lot more force, and then therefore the risk of injury is a bit higher. Other than cottage, another example would be even going into the winter when clients shovel snow for like 30 minutes. shoveling snow is a hip hinge, there's a lot of demand on the back to be stable. And if the back isn't stable, you end up with a sore or uncomfortable lower back for afterwards. Okay?
Cool.
So a great extreme situation would be stepping onto a boat. Okay, we all know boats come in very different sizes, and therefore that angle that you're lifting your leg up or the height that you're lifting the leg up can vary greatly. If you've been in the gym and you've been doing 16-inch step ups, then you're more than prepared to step in a boat that might be moving a lot more aggressively than a boat that is a lot lower on a calm lake. So definitely what we don't want is our clients being limited towards the extreme weather changes that we go through here, and then having to be housebound when they can't enjoy their lake cottage.
Yeah.
Steph, how frequently would you see injuries from cottage sports?
It really depends on how long people have been training for or how aware they are of their body. So it really does vary. I would say it's pretty consistent in the beginning of the summer. You see more people coming like, oh, my back is really sore. I've been playing golf a few times in a row, or like I started up with tennis. Because again, like you had mentioned, throughout the winter, they're not necessarily doing those movement patterns. So they go from doing nothing to, I'm going to golf 5 days a week because it's super nice weather and the cottage is open and the golf course is ready to go. And all of a sudden, now the next couple of weeks are being impacted because their shoulder hurts or their neck hurts or their back hurts from all the rotation and just the one-way patterning of doing things. So near the end of the summer, people now have kind of subconsciously at least trained their bodies into doing that sport more often, whatever the sport is. But especially in the beginning, I would say the stuff that we've been talking about is so important to at least start the summer off with being super strict so that you can actually set yourself up for success going through the summer.
100%. I agree. These injuries are more likely to happen at the beginning. Therefore, making sure our clients are set up at the beginning of summer is a lot more important. Now, you were talking about golf and how people will go from 0 times a week to 5 times a week playing golf. When they get those types of lower back injuries, what type of exercises could they have done to maybe prevent that on the build-up?
Yeah, so anything throughout the winter, like doing any sort of weight training, I would say incorporating a specific warm-up. And all of us have different issues, so you can kind of consult with your trainer, with your physio to kind of create this personalized warm-up for you. But going through the movement that you will be doing is really important. Practice does make perfect. So going through the action of the swing, activating your core and your glutes and any kind of hip movement that you're going to kind of go through in the golf swing will definitely help. And then just being aware throughout the game, if you find that you're getting sore, maybe swing a couple times the other way to kind of balance out that rotation that's happening always on the one side.
Definitely always promoting balance throughout the body, especially with a lot of these sports that are one-sided, such as tennis, golf. I have clients that go paddleboarding, and I will always tell them paddleboard and rotate between your sides. Why? Because otherwise you're just going to go around in circles. Okay. Another type of injury that, or repetitive strain injuries or injuries from poor posture can also happen from these sports. I remember I had a client who came back from a cottage weekend. She said she had a uncomfortable or sore lower back. And then we always sit down and then we'll go through what her physical health was for that previous week. There wasn't many changes other than her going up to the cottage to do some activities, paddleboarding, kayaking, and then pickleball was one. I heard that she played a lot of pickleball, so at the beginning I was like, okay, show me your pickleball stance. What everyone knows as well is there are no mirrors on the pickleball course, so it's hard to kind of see yourself and see what you're doing. When I asked this client to get into her stance, she went into one of the most uncomfortable stances that I'd seen and kind of hunched over, holding on to her pickleball paddle. And at that point, I just waited 10 seconds and I asked, how does this feel? And holding that position for 10 seconds was creating a lot of lower back pain, stiffness around the hips, and then rolled over shoulders that eventually started to work onto her neck. Also, it gave me the opportunity to show my client, can you look at yourself in the mirror? And the second that they saw themselves in the mirror, they realized, no, this is not a good stance to be in. So coaching our clients, maybe saying to them, what is that golf swing going to look like? What is your pickleball stance? What is your tennis stance? Or how do you even stand up on the paddleboard is important to be able to let them see the postures that they're pushing themselves into and trying to maintain.
Mm-hmm. You can even look at that if you don't have a trainer or somebody to help you. Take a photo of your stance, take a video of you hitting the tennis ball so that you can actually visually see what it is that you're doing. It's the same thing as evaluating a golf swing. I know tons of my clients get coaches and they have videos of their golf swing. It's very kind of intricate, but the whole point of it is to actually see what you're doing versus someone telling you or trying to feel what you're doing.
Yeah.
So seeing it from the outside in helps a lot with creating awareness of your position.
Exactly. Great point, Steph. If you can, get those phones out every so often and videotape yourself so you can see your posture. Okay. So we'll go on to the next question. So how often should we be doing these functional movements?
Again, it depends on how much you're doing in terms of the activities. Most people, especially when they go up to the cottage for the weekend is jam-packed with stuff. So trying to incorporate as much as you can to offset the activity will help, in addition to not just the functional movement, but also the rehab or the stretching and flexibility afterwards to decompress the body. So both aspects are important, both the before and the after.
Yes. A great tip that I always tell my clients is you don't get stronger during the workout, you get stronger during the recovery. Okay, so there's more than an aspect of just working out. What comes after is also just as important. Do you recommend doing functional movements before, after, or even during activities?
If you find that you're getting sore, you can definitely do some aspect of a functional movement. Maybe it's just more of a dynamic stretch to kind of help the body relax a little bit. I would say in terms of functional movement, definitely before as a warm up to kind of prepare your body for the actual thing that you're doing. And then afterwards, do something to offset the activity. So a stretch, like if you're playing pickleball, stretch out your chest, stretch out your hips, stretch out your back so that you can kind of relax the muscles that had been used for possibly hours.
And just as a follow-up, when I asked my client afterwards, we worked on the posture playing pickleball, I said, oh, so how long were you playing pickleball for? And the answer was 5 hours. So even if we had great posture, being in that posture for 5 hours is still a challenge.
For sure.
So Steph, what are functional movements that we should be doing to prevent injury for the common cottage sports?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about applying yourself into any sort of physical activity situation, think about where you're coming from. So if you're someone who sits down a lot for their job, naturally you're going to see people who have rounded shoulders, forward head posture, lower back issues, maybe some hip tightness. So all of those things then come into play when you are trying to prevent injury for the sport that you're doing. If your job is more active, then you train different aspects. So definitely everyone can benefit from doing deep core strengthening exercises, from postural stuff to hip stability, rotational work, because most sports do require a lot of rotation, but then a lot of lateral strength. And that can basically be applied for essentially anything.
That can be applied to anything. As we mentioned before, we want flexibility, mobility, stability, and strength all in those joints. Now, what you could also do is look at every joint and address each one by one. So for example, working on ankle mobility, calf raises, and foot taps. You could then work on to hip stability, going for your hip hinges, your deadlifts, your squats. All of these movements are involved in most sports, not all of them, but therefore you could argue that they are all functional movements tailored towards sport.
And the cool thing about this is, yes, we are talking about functional movements to prepare for sport and for cottage stuff, but it's equally, if not more important, to just exist in this functional movement space throughout the entire year, because the more you do in your off season, the better prepared you will be for the times that you're actually trying to execute the movement. So if you're not doing the prep work, then the actual prep work right before you do the stuff is not going to be as effective as if you're training, even if it's different kinds of training, but for the entire year.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree.
Simon, are there any special injury concerns to consider before doing any of the sports? So pickleball, tennis, golf, paddleboarding, anything that you can think of for Cottage World. And for all our listeners who are maybe watching the podcast, we are going to be doing some videos with Simon demonstrating some of these exercises. So if you are watching, pay attention to the video so that you can see exactly what we're talking about.
For pickleball, for example, I may suggest my clients doing something like a split squat to knee drive. That would involve putting one foot in front of the other in a staggered stance, bending both knees, and then gradually driving your back knee up towards the front of your hip and pausing. That pause is extremely important because that pause promotes stability. Up until that point, the joints are all moving and there's not much stability there. So be able to promote stability when you're using a joint is extremely important to try and prevent injury and even repetitive strain injuries as well. Another example would be using the goalie groin stretch for hip mobility. On all fours with one leg out to the side and then moving that body forwards and backwards and trying to let the body get used to having the leg in quite an extreme situation. That will help stretch off some tight muscles, but also allow you to open up the hips, and then when you stand up, they'll be a lot looser for when you can work around the court.
Awesome.
Okay. So Steph, any special injury concerns or what exercises would you do for someone playing golf for the summer?
Yeah, so golf requires a lot of rotation. You have to be able to kind of rotate your whole spine. So any of my clients who are really into golf, I always try and get them to do some T-spine mobility first. I don't exactly know what the exercise is called, but let's call it a preacher stretch. So your elbows are going to be on a bench or even on your couch, and you're going to kind of be on your knees and then collapse down and really just inhale through the middle of your back and hopefully be able to get some stretching in that area. And then same as how I mentioned before, practicing that rotation. So having your arms crossed over your chest and really going through that full rotation of your golf swing will help a ton.
Perfect.
For golf, a great exercise to kind of go through a resistance of the swing, you could do a cable wood chop, which would emulate kind of that the back to front swing, and just have the core activated throughout as you would in a golf swing.
Perfect. And if you go slower than a golf swing, that would promote stability, so there's no bouncing. Whereas we know a lot of our clients are just swinging that golf club as hard as they can.
It's not about speed.
I know. I tell them that all the time. So a couple of examples of exercises for sports such as paddleboarding would be, for example, just teaching clients about balance is one of the most important aspects, and also about anchoring. So an example would be I would get a client on a Bosu ball, so an unstable surface, and then I would give them a dumbbell to just slowly go for a bicep curl. That's great as it teaches the client where their center of gravity is when things are unstable. Therefore, challenging them more, but at the same time, understanding the relationship that if they move too quickly, they have to balance themselves with that movement as well. And then also, similar to golf, torso rotation. I may have a client stand on a balance pad and go for a banded wood chop as they're trying to move the band and keep their feet rooted onto the ground on an unstable surface. Again, it just helps the client be put in that situation where they're on unstable surface, but they're trying to move at the same time. The more they're in that situation, the second they jump on that paddleboard on the lake, they're already in the zone.
For sure. And that can be applied to anything. I mean, obviously wakeboarding and water skiing are much higher degree of difficulty, but the same concepts apply of anchoring your feet, spreading your toes out, activating from the ground up, and then moving through any kind of stability that you need for that specific sport that you're doing.
Exactly. And then also it's a great way of teaching clients that the entire kinetic chain has to be strong. In that extreme situation of wakeboarding or water skiing, that's your entire body weight being pulled up by a handle. So your entire core, lower back, hips, they also have to be able to support your entire weight while holding on to that handle.
In addition to the waves and the boat and
and the speeds and the water splash and all of those other things.
We can't quite emulate that.
Exactly.
But as long as you're prepared enough, then that's okay.
Perfect. And then some similar to paddleboarding, kayaking, although seated. So going from standing on the bossu to sitting on a bossu. So you also have that instability of the surface that you're on. And then giving the client possibly a resistance band to pull backwards to start working on shoulder function, mobility, and strength. Or another example would be having the client balancing on that bossu and doing core exercises to then build up their core so again they can pull harder in the water. Because again, if you don't have a strong anchor, but you can still have strong muscles, you need something to push off of.
And the last one we'll talk about is swimming. So this is a pretty common thing that I'm sure most of our listeners will be doing up at the cottage. Swimming requires a lot of shoulder stability and mobility. So doing some banded pull-aparts is great for activating the back of the shoulders, any sort of rotation around to help with the mobility. And then as well as a bird dog. So getting on all fours, activating the core and extending opposite arm, opposite leg will help with just the kind of stroke and the balance between the two.
Great.
Upper and lower. Now, having talked about all of those sports, would you say that if I'm going for a leisurely swim, would I have to do the same kind of prep work as actually going to do something a little bit more intensive, or is it okay?
I would say that you doing your prep work for a swim will most likely set you up well for the rest of the day, even if you don't go for a swim. So I would be 100% recommending continuing with your functional movements throughout the summer, even if you're not planning on doing any of those activities that day, because in the long term, it's going to set you up for success.
And not just that, I mean, you're also prepping yourself for regular living. Like if you have to bring the jet ski in or the boat, or you're carrying things, none of this functional movement stuff will harm you. It'll help you kind of prepare your body for days of outdoor activities, whatever that looks like.
Exactly. And it may possibly in some cases loosen you off or get you feeling better after feeling tight from a previous day of traveling, for example. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be these great fun activities that we get to do. They can also be activities that we don't like doing, such as sitting on a plane for 8 hours. Or driving up up to your cottage for 2 or 3 hours.
That traffic will get you. So these functional movements will definitely help relieve some of that tension.
Exactly. That road rage is definitely also going to tighten up that back and tighten up your hips. So you're not going to be in the best of moods when you come out of that car.
That's right. Is there a full body warm-up we can do that targets every muscle?
Yes. This depends on how long you want to warm up for. But yeah, you could most likely hit the majority of muscle groups within about 4 to 8 exercises and stretches. What are those exercises and stretches will definitely vary between sport to sport. They'll also vary between client to client depending on their ability and, again, their stability, mobility, flexibility, and strength. But generally speaking, we have set warm-ups for particular sports that we would be recommending to clients that hits the major muscle groups involved in those sports. So, Steph, what are the 3 most important things from our conversation that listeners should remember?
I'd definitely say more is more when it comes to movement. So the more you do, the better you'll get, the stronger you'll be, and the easier you'll have day to day and throughout the summer. Warming up or even just incorporating functional movement is a good idea in general. It doesn't have to only apply to a sport, but it can be something that you do with your family. It can be an activity that happens just on a daily basis to create a better routine for yourself and to have fun.
Perfect. Yeah, those are the most 3 important things to do. Is the last one as well. If you don't have fun, you're going to struggle to stick with it, and you're going to struggle to be consistent.
Well, it's just going to feel like work, which is not the point of this whole thing. It's just to prepare everybody for having a good time, but just making sure that you can continue to have a good time and not throw your back out.
Exactly. So some final thoughts before we go. These movements are sport specific and tailored towards the muscle groups that you'll be predominantly working during your particular activities. However, many of them will target multiple muscle groups, and they'll be useful before any type of movement. Such as if you practice your hip hinge in golf, that's also going to help you with being able to mow the lawn without aggravating your lower back. Warming up before an activity takes a couple of minutes, and it can make all the difference to reduce injury.
Yeah, and it's really about finding this sweet spot between specific enough in your warm-ups, but also general enough so that you're not only waking up the targeted muscles you're about to use, but also preparing your entire body and saying, we're moving soon, let's get with the program and get prepared for a very fun day at the cottage.
And with that, here's hoping that everyone has a great time at whatever the warm weather destination they choose. I'm Simon Lim.
And I'm Stephanie Tzemis.
Stay well, everybody. And remember to film the movements afterwards. Sorry, it's a Ron Burgundy moment.
This podcast episode is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation for endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with any specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.